So welcome back to the last case for this week of February Friday. In this case, just like in the last video, I warned that this video would be taking place out of Chicago. Of course, I know I'm not a native of Chicago, nor do I know anyone that's from Chicago, at least that I know of. But of course, these Chicago cases are very interesting to me. This is why I cover them. This one was actually very nationally known. So I actually have an excuse to cover this one because it did have national coverage and was featured on America's Most Wanted at one point. So, of course, with that being said, let's jump right into it.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
Of course, gotta start with the killer because the story doesn't make sense if you don't. Regina was born on July 17, 1982. Margaret, her younger sister, was born on May 23rd, 1984. They were said to have come from a good family, with good girls staying in school, good grades. Except, of course, Regina was, of course, Chicago, of course, has a lot of gangs, sadly. And so then Regina would meet this Latin King gang member called Johnny Rivera. So then, of course, she starts dating Johnny. The two start skipping school and doing drugs. Regina, of course, being the big sister, would be what Margaret looked up to. So once Regina started acting up, Margaret started acting up right along with her. And so then one night she would be arrested for intention to sell cocaine. A drug bust had apparently been done, and she was found with 2 kilos. Sources are saying that like Johnny was there with her when the drug bust was made, and then others are saying that she was there by herself. But anyway, since she was there, she obviously got arrested. So then her mother somehow got the bail money. I don't know where she got it from, but she got the bail money, bailed her out, and told her to stay away from the gangs. However, she still hung out with him because, teenage rebellion. However, the mom, understandably, I don't even know how much the bail money was, she said, I want my bail money back. So the money I paid to bail you out, I want it back. Then to do this, she starts dating. She is leaving the courtroom after she's bailed out, and she just so happens to bump into this guy named Oscar. And so Oscar apparently was an immigrant from Mexico who was a truck driver at the time. And so he had this very nice white Camaro. And so Oscar was born on November 20th, 1977. At the time they were dating, he was 22 and she was 17. Except I guess he thought she looked older and he didn't know her actual age. At least I would hope he wasn't out here dating a minor. And so then she would ask for a ride, and apparently he pretty much fell head over heels for her right then and there. And so their relationship began. Regina and Oscar were dating for about 3 weeks. The sisters, Regina and Margaret, would come up with the idea to get the money out of him with the impression that Regina was in jail and that she needed $1,000 for the bail. So he gives it to Margaret because Margaret's not in jail, Regina is. So this is obviously a false story. Sources say that Regina actually gave the money to Johnny because he was in jail, and other sources say they basically kept the money for themselves, that Johnny wasn't even in jail and he wasn't even in the picture. So then Oscar would apparently, of course, ask for the money back, as you do, because that's a whole grand. And the sisters refused, but instead they offer a threesome, which for some reason Oscar decides to accept. Except of course there's gonna be a threesome, they're gonna kill him. So then they get a gun from a friend named Veronica Garcia, who got from her boyfriend. On June 6th of 2000, Oscar would be called over to Regina's house. They had already put a tarp for his body to fall on once he is shot in the basement. So of course he doesn't see this when he first walks in. Margaret would ask Oscar if anyone knows that he's there, which that should have been a red flag right then and there, but he's probably thinking he's ready to get laid, so he don't give a shit. I'm assuming he said no. And so then Regina goes down to the basement. Margaret would tell him to go down to the basement to help her. And I guess she tried to make it like she was doing laundry or some shit. So then he goes down, which he's thinking, I guess, to help her. And then Margaret would follow him with the gun that they got from Veronica. Margaret would shoot him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. He, of course, falls with the tarp that they had already laid out, which I guess he somehow didn't see. One of the sisters, I didn't say who, I want to assume Margaret, had apparently kicked him in the head so he could die quick. So they then robbed him of $600. The 3 of them then took Oscar's body in the car to a vacant lot. While putting the body in a car, a neighbor notices. So at this point, Veronica's helping put the body in the car, and apparently they even jumped on the car to close it, because I guess Oscar was that big or the trunk was that small, or maybe even both, who knows. They wrap his body in a bedsheet from the house, and then of course they light that on fire with nail polish remover. And then they left the fingernail polish remover on the scene, which later became a clue to the police to look for teenage girls. Which they probably would have figured out it was nail polish remover eventually, but the fact that you left the bottle at the scene, they knew, okay, we're looking for teenage girls, not grown men. So they messed up there. So then, of course, obviously 911 is called to report the fire. Someone saw the fire. And then 911 report called again after it's discovered that what was burning was actually a human body. Then the sisters were spotted by Oscar's brother in his car a couple of days later. Regina and Margaret actually tried selling the car, but after being unsuccessful, they set it on fire and also abandoned that. Both immediately became suspects. They were questioned, storing that up. Regina even lied and said Johnny may have possibly killed Oscar out of jealousy because Johnny is the ex and Oscar was her current boyfriend. And that was quickly turned to be a lie, luckily. The sisters would come back into the spotlight as the main suspects, and they would flee before getting arrested. So then, of course, with them fleeing and them being so young, I guess it became like national news, which is, again, how I even came across the story in the first place. This case would be portrayed on America's Most Wanted on January 23rd, 2001. Regina would say that she didn't like the actress that was used to play her, saying that she wasn't as attractive as the actual, well, her. And she even cut off her rose tattoo on her stomach because the show mentioned it, and it's something that is easily recognized. So then the show airs again because the first time it aired, apparently there were a bunch of leads, which does sound good, but most of these leads were reported to have been lookalikes. So not the actual women, but women that kind of looked like them. Of course, obviously, while they're on the run, they changed their appearance. So that doesn't even help either. And there were some leads that were legitimate, but by the time they got there, they had missed the girls by like a day or even by a couple hours. So somehow they already got like a heads up that, hey, the police are looking for you, they know where you at. So then Margaret would eventually be captured in Rockford, Illinois, which is only an hour and a half from Chicago, on March 24, 2002, after a tip from a person that saw the show. And so then she was found at an apartment where she was staying with relatives who apparently knew that she was on the run for murder. And so then she was also charged with Oscar's murder and unlawful flight to avoid arrest. And so then on October 18th of that year, Regina was arrested in Dallas, Texas. She was taken in following just a routine traffic stop and a high-speed chase. And so she was also charged with murder and a lawful flight to avoid arrest, just like Margaret. And so then she would be extradited back to Illinois because, again, she was out of state. And so then Veronica Garcia, a friend of the two, would testify for the prosecution in exchange for a short prison sentence under the charge of concealing the homicide. So basically an accessory to homicide instead of getting first degree like the sisters did. And so she claimed to have no knowledge that a murder would happen, that the gun was her boyfriend's, and that it should have only been used in a robbery, basically to like scare Oscar not to kill him. So then she was, of course, sentenced to 5 years, and she has since been released, because this happened back in like the early 2000s. So who even knows where Veronica's at now, if that's even still her name. And then, of course, Regina would be sentenced to 35 years in 2004. The next day, a jury couldn't reach a verdict for Margaret, even though she was the one who pulled the trigger. And so because of this, she was released on bail. And so then luckily she was retried and sentenced to 46 years 3 months later. So yeah, that's the case of the Defranciscos sisters. I tried to pronounce that the best I could. Yeah, so I know a lot of these Chicago cases are going to get on y'all's nerves, but I definitely feel like they should be talked about, because Chicago, y'all be on that shit. Like, I don't know what y'all be on. And so yeah, that'll be it for this episode of Favorite Friday, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Play dead, will you regret everything that you did, that you said? I don't think you understand what you're doing, and my heart's black and blue from the bruising. I feel like when I'm with you I'm losing. I feel like you think that this amusing, sitting there gaslighting and confusing. Was it me, is it me, am I deluded? I'm the one who's always sorry, the conclusion, even though I offer all of the solutions. I wish you loved me like I love you, it's stupid. When I'm alone with you I never feel lucid. I wish I was